For years, Brooklyn Beckham stayed completely quiet while rumors swirled around his relationship with his parents. The public saw smiling family photos, red carpet appearances, and supportive comments online. But behind that polished image, something was clearly building. In his statement, Brooklyn explains that his silence wasn't weakness or avoidance, it was intentional. He claims he spent years trying to keep deeply personal family matters private, hoping that staying quiet would prevent things from getting worse. But according to him, the opposite happened. He alleges that stories kept appearing in the press, stories he says were shaped and fed by his parents and their team, slowly creating a version of events that didn't reflect his reality. As the narrator explains this moment, it becomes clear that this wasn't a sudden emotional outburst. It was a calculated decision made after feeling cornered, realizing that if he didn't speak for himself, the narrative would continue without him. Brooklyn frames this moment as the first time in his life he felt forced to publicly stand up for himself, not to attack, but to correct what he describes as years of misinformation. And, as heavy as that sounds, this was only the beginning of what he was about to reveal. As the story continues, Brooklyn shifts from silence to accusation. He doesn't just claim that rumors existed, he alleges that his parents actively controlled how their family was portrayed in the media. According to him, the carefully curated image of unity, warmth, and closeness was performative, designed for public consumption rather than an honest reflection of reality. He describes a lifetime of social media posts, public appearances, and family events that looked authentic on the surface but felt hollow behind the scenes. The narrator emphasizes how Brooklyn claims this image was protected at all costs, even if it meant placing blame on innocent people. He suggests that whenever cracks appeared, they were quickly covered with press-friendly narratives that shifted responsibility away from the family brand. This part of the story plants an uncomfortable question in the viewer's mind. What if the Beckham family image wasn't just carefully managed, but aggressively defended? Brooklyn insists that he witnessed firsthand how far his parents were willing to go to preserve that facade, and he expresses confidence that no matter how controlled a narrative is, the truth eventually finds its way out. And according to him, that truth became impossible to hide once his relationship entered the picture. The narrator then moves into the moment Brooklyn identifies as the turning point, his wedding to Nicola. Almost immediately, rumors began circulating about tension between Nicola and Victoria Beckham, with much of the focus landing on the wedding dress. Brooklyn directly challenges the public version of events, claiming that his parents had been trying to damage his relationship long before the wedding ever took place. He alleges that Nicola was initially excited to wear a dress designed by Victoria, only for plans to fall apart at the last possible moment. According to Brooklyn, this sudden change forced Nicola into a stressful scramble to find another dress, while the media narrative quietly shifted blame onto her. What stands out here is how Brooklyn frames the situation, not as a fashion disagreement, but as a pattern of interference. The narrator explains that Brooklyn sees this as the moment where private family tension became public spectacle, with press leaks fueling division rather than understanding. And while earlier interviews attempted to smooth things over, Brooklyn now claims that those explanations masked deeper issues that were never truly resolved. But as significant as the dress controversy was, he insists it wasn't the most painful moment of that day. As the story reaches the reception, the tone darkens. Brooklyn recounts what he describes as the most humiliating moment of his life, his first dance. This was supposed to be a carefully planned, intimate moment between him and Nicola, scheduled weeks in advance. Instead, he alleges that everything changed in front of hundreds of guests. According to Brooklyn, Mark Anthony unexpectedly called him to the stage not for the planned romantic dance with his wife, but for a dance with his mother. The narrator carefully explains how Brooklyn describes Victoria's behavior as inappropriate and deeply uncomfortable, saying he felt exposed, embarrassed, and powerless as the moment unfolded publicly. This wasn't just an awkward family interaction, it was, in his eyes, a complete hijacking of a once-in-a-lifetime moment. He claims that the emotional impact of that night lingered long after the celebration ended, turning what should have been a joyful memory into a source of anxiety. And as the narrator points out, once that boundary was crossed, the damage was already done. From emotional moments, the narrative moves into something far more calculated. Brooklyn alleges that his parents repeatedly pressured him to sign away the rights to his own name. The narrator highlights how serious this claim is, especially considering the Beckham name's global value. According to Brooklyn, this wasn't a casual request. It was persistent pressure, including alleged attempts to bribe him into compliance. This transforms the conflict from family tension into a struggle over identity and autonomy. Brooklyn frames his refusal as an act of self-preservation, a decision to reclaim control over his life for the first time. The choice for him and Nicola to combine their last names into Peltz Beckham becomes symbolic, not just romantic. It represents independence, unity, and a clear message that he would no longer allow others to define who he was or what his name represented. And this act of defiance, he suggests, only widened the gap between him and his family. Then explains how the fallout extended beyond his parents. Brooklyn claims that during the height of the conflict, he received attacks not only privately, but publicly, and that even his brothers became involved. He alleges that Romeo and Cruz were encouraged to criticize him on social media before suddenly cutting off contact altogether. This part of the story emphasizes isolation. Brooklyn describes feeling outnumbered and shut out, watching family relationships unravel in real time. The narrator underscores how painful it must have been to see siblings, people he grew up with, turn into participants in a conflict he felt was never fairly represented. Blocking him without warning, he claims, symbolized the complete breakdown of communication. And just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, one final event pushed the rift into full public view. David Beckham's 50th birthday should have been an opportunity for reconciliation. Brooklyn says he traveled to London hoping to reconnect, only to be repeatedly rejected. According to him, every attempt to meet privately was ignored, unless it involved attending the massive birthday celebration filled with cameras and guests. When David finally agreed to see him, Brooklyn alleges it came with one condition: Nicola could not be present. The narrator explains how Brooklyn describes this as a final slap in the face, reinforcing the belief that his marriage was still being undermined. The situation worsened when the family later traveled to Los Angeles and allegedly refused to see him at all. Publicly, their absence from photos spoke louder than words, and the silence on social media only fueled speculation. By this point, the rift was no longer rumor, it was undeniable. The narrator addresses the most common accusation Brooklyn has faced, that Nicola is controlling him. Brooklyn completely rejects this idea, calling it backwards and unfair. He claims that the control he experienced came from his parents, not his wife, and that stepping away from his family dramatically changed his mental health. He speaks openly about living with overwhelming anxiety for most of his life, anxiety that he says disappeared once he created distance. For the first time, he describes waking up feeling calm, grateful, and in control of his choices. He ends by explaining what he and Nicola want moving forward: a quiet life free from manipulation, image management, and press games. No performance, no narratives, just peace, privacy, and happiness. And as the narrator closes this chapter, one question lingers. Was this the collapse of a family, or the cost of finally telling the truth?